Okay, today I'm going to be making a sword based on this particular piece here that was sent to me by My Hand Designs. Jamie does some really interesting work. One of the interesting things about a lot of SCA merchants is that these pieces really last. And Jamie, once upon a time, this mounting hole, which you've heard me talk about before, used to be actually too small for my taste. He experimented a little bit. He made a standard version and then a large version, and then the rattan held up so much better on the large version that became the only version. So if you do have an old by my hand sword handle or hilt, I would recommend getting up with Jamie and getting some of his new stuff. He loaned this to me today just so I can make this video, and I'm actually going to be mailing this back to him when I'm complete, but he did give me some permission to have some fun with it. So first off, this particular piece, when it's sent out, you notice it's still got the scale on the piece. It's also still got the welding marks, so very much rough cut. That's intentional. A lot of SCA people really don't take care of their stuff, and it's cheaper to not do a whole lot of decorative stuff if it's going to be wasted effort. If you notice, I've already taken a little bit of steel wool, cleaned up the scale on this a little bit. Next thing I want to do is take some Rust-Oleum paint. There's a lot of different materials that you can use to paint metal for SCA use. This is just my preference. I know a lot of other people have their own opinions on what works best as well. Next thing we're going to do, I'm going to do something a little bit fancier, a little bit heavier. So I'm also going to go with a shorter blade. So I used to have a piece I called a Type 10 sword, which had a fuller running up the length of the blade. It was made out of 1.75-inch rattan. I'm going to do something similar to that today, but I'm going to use 2-inch rattan, a little bit thicker. I'm also going to keep it short, so the total length on this piece of rattan is going to be 27 inches. So let's get to work. So I'm going to paint this, let it dry, and while I'm waiting on that to dry, I'm going to go ahead and knock this down a little bit so it's not a little more sword shaped. I think we can accept as a given that I will never get a job as a painter. While we wait for that to dry, I did want to mention that I went ahead and painted not just the parts you're going to see, but the parts that's going to be covered anyway, because these are mild steel and paint is a good rust-proofing device. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of evidence that more material was painted back in the day than we previously thought. The knight in shining armor was a thing, but painting for rust-proofing was also a thing as well. Jamie's stuff, by the way, is available on Facebook. If you look for By My Hand Designs, you can find these hilts. You can also find some foam pieces, which he uses for pole arms. You notice I called this a hilt. This is a crossguard. This is a pommel. The entire piece is the hilt. I have seen a few merchants who refer to the crossguard as a hilt, and that's actually incorrect. So we're going to wait for that to dry, and instead I'm going to get back to work on this piece here. Okay, the hilt is mostly dry, so what we're going to do now is move on to the next step. So our actual tang is going to go from here to here, and we're right at, well, here, let's measure it this way. Yeah, so we're at 5 and 7/8. So next thing, what we're going to do then is on the wood, we're going to mark a line at 5 and 7/8. I've already done this. Next thing we did is set a center line, and then from the center line measure out so that we end up with an 1.5 inch wide piece. Now what I'm going to do here is this guy here, I'm actually going to give it a little bit of a distal taper. So start a little bit thicker and then move down to 1.25 inches. The goal of this is to put a little bit more of the weight back towards the back. Where the weight's distributed, I think, has a bigger impact on how the sword handles sometimes than the total weight. So we've got our center line here, marked out here. I went ahead and took a draw knife, cut it down. Did the same thing here. As you can see, it's a little bit narrower on this side. So now we've got a flat piece to work from. Next thing we're going to do is mark the blade. So working again from that same center line, I'm going to make the striking surface here 3/4 of an inch. So we're just going to mark over 3/8, and then 3/8 the other way. It's going to give us a nice line right here. And then we're going to do the same thing on the other side. We'll do the same thing down here. So right here at the end of the handle, 3/8, 3/8 over here. Okay, and then you're just going to shoot that line down. I'll do that here in a minute. Okay, next thing we're going to do is mark where we're going to cut on the blade itself. Now this particular guy, if you remember on the last tutorial, I put one line down the center, kind of like this, and from there we carved to the edge. This guy here I'm going to put a fuller in, and I'm going to make that fuller 3/4 of an inch wide, just like the blade. So again, 3/8 and 3/8. Okay, then I'm going to shoot those lines up here, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to carve from here to here, put a nice little bevel on that. So we're going to end up with this striking surface here, which is still going to have the skin on it, and we're going to have right here a flat spot, which I'm going to later turn into a fuller. Now this particular design on a real sword, the shape that we're going for is kind of like this. So you've got a fuller, and then you've got a very, and what this allowed people to do is it allowed you to make a sword that was very, very thin and was flexible in this direction, but rigid in this direction. Very nice way of making a very nice cutter. Now in the SCA, because we have some minimum thicknesses, what we end up with is something a little bit more like this. And up. Pardon my bad drawing. So this is the shape we're going to end up with to get that 1.25 inch minimum thickness that we need right here. Now the design that I did before, where we've got that same striking surface, but we're going up to here on a single line like this. This guy here is actually going to be lighter than this one. Just a little bit of detail. So the fuller on a real sword produces a lighter weapon. Actually on an SCA sword, because of the minimums involved, it does not. So if you're going for efficiency, I'd go with this design here. Said this guy here, I'm going to get a little bit fancier just to go fancy. So it's still, I mean, the difference I'm talking about here is a matter of ounces. So this is not, by any of the stretch of the imagination, a very heavy sword. And certainly it's much, much lighter than the old fish bats that people make, where they end up with basically a flat board. So this is going to be lighter than this. This is going to be lighter than this. But the difference between these two is going to be only a matter of ounces. So let's actually finish shooting those lines and do a little carving. Okay. That should just about finish it. So as you can see, you've got a bevel on each of these 4 points going up to this nice little central mark right here. Yeah, I got a little bit of bump there. Let's smooth that out just a touch. There we go. Okay, and that's going to go all the way down. Now down here where the handle's going to begin, don't worry if you go beyond that point. This is going to be smaller anyway. So next thing I'm going to do, and I actually got a little bit ahead of myself when I did this, but right here we're going to measure down 3 inches and put a mark there. And then from here, I'm going to do this, and this is where the fuller is going to end. So right there, about halfway up. And then up here, we're going to actually go like this. And give ourselves a point. Now, this will make a little bit more sense when we get a little bit farther along. So from right about here, all the way down to here, and then the exact same thing here. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is I'm actually going to remark where my handle is. So this is 6 inches. I've got it sitting at the 1 inch mark, or sorry, 5 7/8. And you can see I've got this mark. The end here on a ruler is very often worn down a little bit. So if you're using a ruler to try to get precise measurements, it's a good idea to start at a line like number 1. And then we get our line. So our handle will be right about there. As you can see, we've got that mark here before. It's a good idea to go back and refresh from time to time. So right there. Now you notice I did my center line to here, where the blade is going to end. Quite often, especially on swords with longer handles, the wood itself will have maybe a little bit of a curve in at this point, and by setting it here, since this is going to be narrower anyway, we don't have to worry so much about the curve of the wood. So marking from here to here is where I do my center line. Okay, so next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a little chisel and I'm going to cut out this fuller. Now the chisel I'm going to be using today, you can see here it's got a nice little curve to it. When I first started, I actually didn't have this. This is something I acquired over the years. When I first started, I actually had one of these cheap little Walmart kits. As you can see, I was a little rough on it, especially the curved guy. And what I would do is I would very slowly do my little marks through here, and then afterwards I would take some rough grit sandpaper and a dowel rod and run it up like that in order to smooth out all the roughness from that. So this is much better, but not a necessity. And a lot of people said it does not take expensive tools to do this. So what we're going to do is, I said, we're going to very carefully dig our little fuller. Now, on this guy here, you can go pretty much as deep as you want. I like a nice deep fuller. But you need to make sure that this point up here still meets the rules as far as thickness. So you could actually dig this all the way down to till the fullers were practically touching each other. But there's a point of diminishing returns there. You're going to eat up some strength if you do that too deep. But what I'm aiming for, this shape here, should give me a nice depth. Now, earlier I had mentioned using a dowel rod to smooth this out. As you can see, for the curved spot, my finger also happens to be about the right size. And use more than a fair amount of 60 grit sandpaper doing this. Now, in addition to doing this on the fuller, I'm also going to take a flat block and do the same thing and make sure I get a nice smooth surface here on the striking edge as well. Okay. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this point right here, and if you notice here, we still got our center line, so I'm going to extend that up just a touch. Do it over here as well. Create a center. There we go. There's going to be our center. And a little grade school compass like this is one way to do this. Now you notice I seem to be missing a couple pieces here. Another thing my kids got a hold of. Another trick you can do is any round object, as long as it's the right size. This is way too big, so that's not going to work either. So, when all else fails, what you can do is just simply grab a ruler, start from your center, and make a whole bunch of lines like that. And then gradually form something like this. Now, when you're doing something like this, it's a good idea to remember that you're going to be cutting on the outside of this line. If you cut inside, you end up taking a little bit of length off of your sword to make up for it. Okay. Make sure that's up way. As I said, it's always a good idea to double check. Oh, that's too narrow. And that is too. Somewhere like that. There we go. Okay, now remember this line right here. So what I'm going to do is right here at the 3-inch point, I'm going to carve and here, actually measure those. 1, 2, 2, 3, and there. So what I'm going to do is this little bit right here, I'm going to carve that off. And I'm going to carve from here to this line here. So all of this I'm going to take off. All of this is going to get, and basically is going to do that. Okay, so that's done. You can see right there where that line was. And we've gone down to this point right here. So let's see how well this works. So first off, go ahead and mark our way up there. And nope, didn't pass through. Now you notice that even though this goes into the fuller, we're still passing this way as well. And remember, I cannot stress enough the importance of having this extra second check here. Make sure. So everything down here passes. Everything this way passes. Okay, we're good to go. And very close on right here. That's fine. Still legal. And just remember, this is also going to get some tape on it, so it's going to be a little bit thicker than this. Okay, but we're good to go here. So next thing then is to take our center line. We want to shoot that down to here. Find our point here. And also find our center here. And basically at the end here, find this where we're going to build from. And then we're going to take Jamie's little piece right here. And we're going to, once we get it centered up, we're going to mark our circle and then carve down from there. Now, as we do this, it's very common for our center to end up a little odd. So you notice this little prominence right here. The actual center is all the way over here. So this is why I actually mark it out and mark our center lines instead of just eyeballing it. Okay, now if I had a crossguard like this, which is the one from foxknife.com, all I'd have to do is once I got this cut out, I'll put it on nice and tight, and then we're done until it came time to put it in the pommel. Now on the by my hand design, you notice we've got these bars here that come down to a taper. Now, what I've seen a lot of people do is they'll actually cut a V-shaped tang to fit into this. So they actually try to make this thing fit onto here. What I think I'm going to do instead, I'm going to do something a little bit original and make something that doesn't taper, just to try to do something a little bit different than what I've seen before. Okay, one quick comment. Now, as you can see, what I'm heading toward is I'm actually going to cut down a groove right in here so that this piece can fit down inside it. So this is actually going to be a little bit wider than the 3/4 of an inch that we've got at the base here. I'm going to keep this profile so it'll fit in the hand very nicely through a groove. Now, on most swords, the weak point is right in here. Most carved swords, I should say. And the fear, and this is something that I've done in the past through hard lessons, is that you really want to hurry and finish this. Now, right now, it's well after midnight, and I was cutting, and I made a little bit too deep, a little too wide right here. It's not a minor flaw. It's not a major flaw. I can easily fix it, but that was a really good sign for me that it's time to call it a night and come back to this tomorrow. So I'll see you tomorrow. Good morning. Okay, now technically it is still morning. So when I went to sleep last night, I had an interesting idea on what I was going to do with these bars right here. And the idea that I had was to take a block of wood, cut it down to the exact same width, and then take some 60 grit sandpaper and put on there. So what I've been doing is I've been very slowly cutting my groove, and I've been supplementing this with my chisel here, and then going back to smooth it out, to square it off using this block here. Now, when I'm talk about fitting a crossguard onto a handle, I frequently talk about a tight fit. And when I say a tight fit, I mean scrape off the paint during my test fittings kind of tight fit, Hit it on with a rawhide mallet kind of fit. So let's see what we've got. There we go, inset very nicely. Now actually, if you notice, this is a prototype. I didn't quite get it as wide as I wanted up here. I actually ended up taking off a little bit of extra up here in the process of cutting this groove. So if I had to do this again, I'd make sure to get this nice and wide so that this is actually inset into it almost the entire way up. Now another idea I had was actually to take a little bit of that same wood that I cut down, or maybe something a little prettier, and putting it over this, gluing it down, and then finishing off the entire thing, sand it down, use some resin, make it nice and pretty. I'm not going to do that today. All I'm going to do today is just use tape. Okay, handle's done. A little bit of plain old hockey tape. I can still see that bar right there, but you notice that it goes down here and get much smoother down here. So still gives a very, very nice grip. So looks pretty good. I'm getting really excited about this. The balance point on this sword is right here. Yeah, right here. So very, very quick little blade I'm going to have here, despite the what I'd said earlier about this being a heavier blade design. So let's tape up the blade. Oh, thrusting tips. A lot of different materials you can use for thrusting tips. I particularly like these pre-cut ones from Munitions grade arms. Just saves me a little bit of effort. He also has one that's got a little bit of a point to it as well. I think for this design, I'm probably going to go with this one. Yeah, so that'll work. Gives a nice long point. Okay, make sure the tape gets in there nice and deep. Now, on a lot of rattan swords, this spiral wrap the tape. It gives you multiple layers of tape, gets a little bit more durability. I want this fuller to be nice and distinct, so what I'm doing is I'm actually running the tape vertically. Not a big deal. I'm also not going particularly thick with the tape. Tape can add a whole lot of weight onto a sword, and I figure it's easier, well, not easier, but better to use a thin layer and then replace it or add more often, as opposed to just piling on a whole big pile of extra weight. Okay, so speaking of weight, let's see how much weight we've got here. Now, I need to put something on the striking surface. Probably going to use plain old electrical tape in either red or black, just to match the color palette on everything else here. I'm actually out of electrical tape right now, which is odd. I'm going to get that fixed very, very quickly. And let's see what we got here. So first off, zero this off. There we go, ounces. And so total weight, 2 pounds, 6 ounces. So under 2.5 pounds, which is the average weight. So this guy here is going to be right in the weight range for a real sword from this era. It's also, as I said, balanced very close to the handle. So this guy here is going to be very, very quick for its weight. So that's what we got there. Let's swing this around a little bit. Well, that was fun. So next thing then is just get a nice picture out in the nice sunny day to take full advantage of that Mylar-based shiny tape. And then we're going to call this project done. Now, I am actually falling in love with this guy. Oh, a quick note before I go. This particular piece, as I mentioned, came from By My Hand Designs. You look them up on Facebook if you want to get some of their stuff. The thrusting tip was Munitions grade arms, where I get a lot of things. Pretty much if I'm wanting to buy something, I check and make sure to see if Eric's got it before I go shopping around for anything else. I also mentioned foxknife.com is up and running again. That's not exactly accurate. The website has been down for about 3 years. When I stopped selling, decided to look at going back into that again. But at the moment, the website does not work properly, and that you can pull up all the stuff, you can get a total, you can get shipping information, all that stuff. But when you try to click checkout, it's giving us a little bit of grief. By the time you see this video, that may be fixed. If it's not, just get up with me on the contact form or get up with me on Facebook, and then we'll go ahead and there's no reason for a website to stop us from being able to connect with each other. That's not what websites are for. So next video, I'm thinking about doing something here on a how-to video on this particular Gladius. I just got this handle back from a guy that does some wood turning for me. Also, he also does these nice little maces, which I particularly like. Technically, this is a sword. It's a single unpadded piece of rattan. So as a sword, it doesn't necessarily maybe need to be padded. Anyway, you get up with your local marshal on the rules with that. That is definitely something that's going to vary kingdom to kingdom. So until then, I'll see you next time and have fun.